Welcome back to Alberta Prime Time and the nightly Vocal Point now. Joining our Wednesday crime panel, former Edmonton Police Chief, now President of Rayner Consulting, Fred Rayner. Defence Lawyer Rod Gregory in with us tonight.
Good evening.
And in Calgary, on the phone, Justice and Social Issues reporter for the Calgary Herald, Jason Van Rassel. Welcome back to Alberta Prime Time. Gentlemen.
Hey, Michael.
All right. Sorrow, sadness, tragedy, all south of the border as more victims lay to rest in the aftermath of that deadly shooting at a school in Newtown, Connecticut. Barack Obama now pushing for concrete proposals, quick legislation that would help curb gun violence. The U.S. president also pressing Congress to reinstate an assault weapons ban that expired in 2004. Jason, we had a long gun registry in Canada. It's gone now. But in contrasting the situation between our two countries, are we in a position as Canadians to say we do a better job of gun control?
Inefficiency or the failure of our long gun registry doesn't equal, or it's not an indictment of gun control. Gun control doesn't really begin and end with a long gun registry. You have to remember that many of the weapons that are perfectly legal in the U.S., and I'm thinking of handguns and assault rifles, are either restricted or outright prohibited in Canada. And certainly, you can look at it on a per capita basis, and the amount of gun violence per capita in Canada is just a fraction of that in the United States. I think it's also important to point out, and I think Fred's going to make this point when it comes around to him, that legislation is probably not a panacea. We're talking about a deeply entrenched gun culture in the States, and a few strokes of the pen and changes of legislation aren't going to change that. But I don't think that should be a deterrent to at least starting to try to move things in that direction.
So let's ask Fred, is gun control the issue?
Well, Jason reads me like an open book. I know.
He's a reporter.
He's a reporter. He's an investigator. Knows how to dig. No, President Obama is going to do what the community is expecting him to do. He's convened a task force. What a surprise. Back in 1994, I think Clinton signed the Brady Bill into law after the assassination attempt on Reagan, and they tried to toughen up their background checks and a bunch of different things. Jason is quite right in pointing out Canada already has and has had for many, many years. The tragic part of this, that's equally as tragic as the shooting at the school, is that they're hoping that the changes they make with gun control legislation are going to make their community safer. And study after study, and the U.S. Justice Department is full of these studies, has failed to draw a suitable conclusion between these gun control measures and the outcome that they expect. There's other things that they have to do in terms of securing their schools, in terms of doing preventive work around domestic violence, mental health issues, drug addictions. There's a lot of other more complex things than just whatever Obama's going to knock off in the next 60 days.
Rod, more security at our schools?
I don't think we need more security in our schools, and I agree with Jason and Fred. Our gun control is a federally regulated piece of legislation. It's valid and enacted across Canada. In the U.S., the gun control is state by state. And we have a very extensive background check, and the criminal code has relaxed rules of evidence and given police more powers in gun cases. So I think we do more in Canada, but it's troubling to try to figure out what it is about U.S. society that causes people, and I know we have had a couple of cases in Canada and less so in Europe, but really the U.S. seems to be the prime place in the world where people commit these mass murders. And what is it about the U.S. society that causes that? And that's really, I think Fred touched on some of those issues.
All right, what is it about excessive drinking? As we prepare for the rapid approach of the holiday season, police in our province are warning of the dangers of excessive drinking. This following separate incidents in Slave Lake. One man found dead of exposure in his backyard after apparently being dropped off at home from a Christmas party. The other died after falling down a set of stairs. Fred, speak to us about these dangers. You wore the uniform.
I did, yes. Well,
just how quickly it turns tragic.
We're in the holiday season here. Everybody's going to be celebrating. Inevitably, they're going to be drinking. This time of the year, drinking a lot. and we're in for a cold snap here as well. It's a bad combination because the alcohol consumption clouds people's judgment. They think they can just nip out to the car, no coat on. They're drunk, they get out there, they don't find the car, they can't remember where they came from. Years ago, I remember picking a guy up. He was passed out in a snowbank, and the paramedic that responded to the scene said, "Hey, come here, have a look at this." And he tapped the guy on the hand with a little mini mag, and it sounded like he was hitting granite. The guy's hands were frozen so hard, it was just like he was tapping on a rock. 6 weeks later, the guy came out of hospital. He'd only lost one pinky finger out of the whole deal. So you can say that guy got away very, very lucky. He could have lost both his hands, could have lost his life. So do people need to pay attention this time of the year? You bet.
Jason, quick point from you before we go to break.
Well, I think, we have to be clear that ultimately the responsibility for alcohol consumption rests with the individual. But we also regulate the liquor industry to ensure against, them over-serving people and making things worse. And I've been saying for years that the penalties for violations of our liquor laws are not stiff enough and not much of a deterrent. I just looked through some of the recent decisions the AGLC meted out for violators across the province. I mean, we're talking about places getting a choice between a 2-day license suspension and a $500 fine. And when these are high-volume bars that are selling a lot of liquor, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to pay the $500 and move on. So, there's not really a lot of incentive for our bars and establishments in Alberta to be mindful of complying with the law when you're handing out a paltry $500 fine for over-serving somebody.
All right, we'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll look back at some of the more contentious issues of 2012. We're back after the break. Welcome back to Alberta Primetime's nightly Vocal Point, and time now for the Crime Panel to reflect on some of the more contentious issues of 2012, starting with provincial changes to impaired driving legislation. They garnered a lot of attention, a lot of headlines, polarized debate playing out right here on Alberta Primetime. Fred, you're on board with these changes from the outset. You're a big proponent of it. But how long before we see the true impact?
Well, I think much like BC, when they introduced the .05 legislation, it took at least a year for them to collect enough data, some information, to show that it was duplicating a lot of the success that legislation has shown in other jurisdictions, other countries. So I wouldn't be surprised if Alberta has to wait, a year, maybe 2 years for the traction to occur and for the numbers to tell us what kind of success they're having.
Rod, the debate on this one has been hot and heavy. Why the charter challenge?
Well, they're successful in taking people off the road who haven't committed a criminal offense. So there's a reason the criminal code has .08 as the legal limit, because scientifically that's when you're impaired. So I'm completely against the government seizing people's vehicles and taking people off the road when they haven't committed a crime. I have no difficulty with prosecuting people when they refuse to provide a breath sample if they should, or if they blow over the legal limit, they should be prosecuted.
Okay, another contentious story of 2012, the Harper government's passing of its omnibus crime bill. Jason, tough on crime, that's the label long attached to this legislation. Why does this bill continue to get Canadians so worked up?
I think part of the reason is because we've seen crime trend lower for years now, and I think it's a valid question to ask whether the wholesale changes the Harper government is bringing about are necessary. I almost feel the need, because I've been on the show several times criticizing some of these measures, to say that this isn't a partisan commentary about the Tories or the Harper government. Just part of my job, I also cover immigration, and the government's making a lot of positive changes on that front, but they're doing it to address tangible problems such as backlogs and labor shortages. I'm left wondering, though, when crime has been going down in this country for years, just why the necessity to upset the apple cart with all these really fundamental changes to the way our justice system has worked all these years.
Rod, many a defense lawyer will tell you the government is getting it wrong with the omnibus crime bill. Why isn't tough on crime what we need here in Alberta?
Well, for the same reasons Jason said, the crime rate's going down. The most right-wing Republican governors in the U.S. have said This strategy of incarcerating doesn't work. We need to put money into other programs. What the Harper government doesn't talk about is how they want to fight crime, but they're fighting with their own federal drug prosecutors over their wages, and they're losing federal drug prosecutors because their morale is so low. So they'll project their tough on crime stance, but they won't tell us about all of the things that they're doing that negatively impacts the criminal justice system.
We're only leaving you with about 45 seconds, Fred, but your university students have looked at this. They've had a change of heart. Yes?
They did. Well, I showed them a bunch of the clips that were available publicly on some of the critics of the omnibus bill. And I think the federal government's probably a victim of their own political marketing when they came out and they said, we're going to be tough on crime. And so the whole thing gets wrapped up as a tough on crime bill. When you look at those specific elements that are the tough on crime parts, maybe 75%, 2/3 of the thing. The remainder of the bill has a lot of good things in it in terms of trying to protect young people from predatory behavior on the internet or otherwise would expose young people to risk. And once the kids had a chance to sit down and actually dissect it, the way the majority of Canadians will never do, they said, you know, there's a lot to like in this omnibus bill. So you know, the message that takes off isn't always the one that lands.
And that means the debate will continue. I hate to say it, we're out of time. That's former Edmonton Police Chief, now President of Rayner Consulting, Fred Rayner, defense lawyer Rod Gregory, and on the phone tonight, justice and social issues reporter with the Calgary Herald.